Before I turn over to you, I would just like to have kind of a 1 or 2 word answer from each one of our panelists. If you would have a magical wand, what is the one thing that you think you would like to change to make the applications of imaging in cultural heritage even more successful than it currently is? You want to start, Albert?
Okay, for me clearly is that so far in terahertz there is no camera that works in time domain.
So
everything.
Specific piece of equipment.
Yeah,
Yep.
so far it's just a single pixel, so it takes forever to take an image. So I like to see a terahertz camera that works in time domain. So.
Paul?
Yeah, I could give that a shot. One of the projects that I'm working on was really when I showed the visualization of the sort of the different dimensions, I guess, of photographic paper. I think that tool could be very useful for scholars, art historians, conservators to really compare materials. And so the magic wand, I guess, if I had it, I would come up with a platform for the ability to query across materials and find material-based affinities across objects, across collections. That would be my thing.
I think I'd build on that, but from the data side, I'd like to see centralized access to all data freely available. So you can do these comparisons, you can look across modalities and share and learn from that.
Well, I think my dream is a cost of the whole thing coming down. Right now, the scanners, the printers, the third-party services are still prohibitively expensive, and that's the main deterrent for using them more extensively in conservation and research. I cannot still imagine anyone in Guatemala or Honduras, say, buying a structured light 3D scanner, for example.
Thank you. Any questions from you?
I work at the Museum of Fine Arts Boston, and we have some interesting projects going that are conservation-based, but I'd be really interested in collaborative projects with scientists. How did you guys get your collaborative projects started? How did you meet conservators, or how did they find you?
The question is how to get collaborative projects started. So we have talked quite a bit about collaboration between people doing the imaging, scientists, conservators. How do you get these projects started?
Well, I'm a conservator, not a scientist, so I can't speak to how to find conservators or how scientists find conservators. The way I found the scientists that I worked with, one is in my family, so I don't know where he is, but he's around here somewhere. He's going to be demoing the RTI thing. For me, you have to show up. You have to show up with data. I mean, that was sort of the key to get any sort of collaboration going. It's nice to talk about things, and I certainly had great conversations with people like Rick Johnson and other people that you might know who are interested in computational art history, for example. But if you don't show up with data, then there's no raw materials for them to work with. And so that was a big sort of threshold that I had to cross, is get a lot of texture data, get a lot of UV data. And then we could get a project off the ground. And then scientists become interested because they can do stuff. And so now a lot of that texture data, it's being downloaded. There's a website devoted to it. You can download it, and people are creating algorithms, search and retrieval algorithms around textures from that work. And so now it's turning up in like PhD thesis and stuff like that. So having conversations is the easy part. Showing up with data and then doing the science, I think, is the tricky part.
If I could add, I'd say, one, start small and clearly define what you, as the conservator or the scholar, want to do functionally. Don't get caught up in the technology, but functionally, this is what you want out of it. Go to the scientists or to people who work with the scientists and say, hey, this is what I want, and then start the conversation. But start small. Work with a small program, allow mistakes to happen, learn from those small mistakes, and then develop it from there. And I always say go in a loop cycle where build on that, go to the next one, build on that.
Other questions? In the back? Yep.
I'm sure you all have policies for your digital storage, especially in preservation context. I wouldn't ask you to tell us them all now, but are there any kind of major takeaways that you've had from trial and error maybe, or just things that you weren't expecting that you ended up seeing and planning for, that it's something that you planned for that didn't happen? Just any kind of words of the wise about digital preservation.
The question is around digital preservation of the data that you are creating.
Well, I can add that if you manage in a project, you probably shouldn't have much hope for some of the raw data that you generate, especially if you're generating with a proprietary software. So I think that's our major concern, not necessarily an experience, but our major concern, to process as much of it as possible to formats which then can be shared more widely. We don't expect people to pay, say, $6,000, $12,000 for a license to be able to view our data. So that's a very, very important concern. And you have to plan for it. Basically, try to create your logistics in a way, the process in a way that you get to the stage when your data can be shared fast enough, so you don't end up with a lot of data that may not be shared, and then you wouldn't have time to process. Then the project is over, and then maybe the data can be lost forever.
You know, the NEH and NIH both require data management plans for proposals. And I think whether or not you're doing an NEH or NIH proposal, think about your data management at the beginning, because you don't want to back into that at the end. And you need to have a good feel for how much data, how you're going to move it around, and don't underestimate the value of FedEx for actually just getting those data to a server to then make it available, and to consider, as you've cited, the storage costs there. But even if you're not required to have a data management plan, at least be able to in bullet points say, okay, this is what we're going to need to do, and get to know your IT folks very well and work closely with them.
Time for a couple more questions? Would any of you want to talk a little bit about standards and how you think about the importance of standards for the different, not just for the image capture, but for processing, for sharing data, for digital preservation, and maybe also a little bit how that might have changed if you think about where we were 20 years ago to where we are today?
Well, I can talk from my point of view. I mean, my talk, in a way, was about standards and sort of coming up with kind of de facto protocols and the benefit of that. And that was a weird talk for me to even think about giving, because, I mean, I never wanted to be like that guy to say, you know, this is how you do it, and here's why, you know? But, I mean, the benefits, you know, as we have the capability to do things in an interoperable way, the benefits of spreading well thought out techniques and protocols across collections can be really significant if we can enable, you know, back to my wish, you know, my wish is this ability to search the material basis of objects. The only way we're going to be able to get at that, I think, is if repositories that have those objects are documenting them in very specific interoperable ways. And so where we are in terms of 20 years, what was the time frame?
About 20 years.
Yeah. Well, I mean, 20 years ago, I was still documenting with film. And if you remember that, no matter what you did to standardize your process, you could still get back before and after treatment images with the wrong color balance based on processing variables. If you wanted to display them with projectors side by side, the color temperature of the bulb could undermine you. So there was really no effective way to objectively compare condition. You were making a picture of the condition, but it wasn't data. It was useless from the standpoint of data. And I think if, again, if we can come up with these kind of interoperable, I hate to use the word, but standards that we can agree, and this is where, dealing with subject matter experts are really important, and getting the subject matter experts for photography, for example, photographic prints, in the same room with the imaging experts who can really, help you understand what the important attributes are that need to be captured and documented, and then how to do that effectively, do it well, and do it in a cost-effective way. That's a collaborative process. And I think that's an evolution, too. It's not just conservators talking to conservators anymore.
I can't say enough good things or express enough appreciation for the various standards committees. I look back to when we started out with the Archimedes palimpsest in '99 and working with the Unicode folks, with TEI, even to have Creative Commons come around, as well as the old TIFF protocol, which has become a standard. So. We're really building on the work of others, and were it not for their continued efforts to continue to refine the standards and to bring standards to bear to new technologies, I think with terahertz, with 3D, I mean, these are tough challenges. I mean, we've got it easy dealing with TIFF, but when you're dealing with 3D, you're dealing with motion, with many of these, you still have a lot of work to go with the standards, but if they apply these committees and the collaboration that takes place continues, I think we have a good foundation.
I can add on my end that sometimes among colleagues, there's a certain lack of transparency of procedures. We use different types of equipment, different types of software. Sometimes we don't even know what is happening because things like knowing exactly the amount of error introduced by processing may be part of the proprietary information that the company making the software doesn't want to share, because it reveals how the software actually works. And then sometimes we use these new amazing technologies as a kind of definitive argument. I was at some point part of a discussion on a Rapa Nui monument, and one side in the argument brought in a 3D scan as the definite proof of the point that they wanted to make. The quality of that 3D model, though, was so low that was impossible to say anything about it, but it just sounded so great. They did a 3D scan with a laser scanner. The resolution was way lower than a good photograph with a good camera and decent raking light. That was actually much more useful for an epigrapher. But that's something we need to sort of get around, the cloud of technology, and return, as we all mentioned, to the purpose and, of course, the standard, what we actually want to do with it as scholars or as museum specialists.
As a closing question, or for some closing statements, I'd like to ask each one of you to, again, just a couple sentences, talk about people and skills. How can we make sure we develop the skills to really collaborate? Because collaboration is only possible if all the people involved have some commonality that they can actually work together. What can we do? Like we did a lot of work on standards in the last 20 years. There was a lot of work done in skill development. But what do you see that could still be improved when we think about skills necessary to do all the fascinating things we have been hearing about this afternoon?
If I may say so, my project, we work in Latin America. So for us, the conservation is a social process. It's very important to be able to involve the local community, but also to make sure that you're not just creating data or setting policies, but making it part of the community life. You're transmitting the knowledge, you're training local folks. With 3D, of course, it's a formidable challenge. Now I have colleagues in Honduras who are trained in using the software. My principal assistant is actually doing a BA in archaeology now, so hopefully he'll continue to use this. more professionally. The more complicated the technology becomes, the more challenging then is the task. But I think it's essential, especially in the context of field work, working at certain sites. We have to make sure that there is something staying in place in the long term. Otherwise, our efforts are just futile.
I think in my experience, and I think also kind of replying to one previous question about collaboration, I mean, one of the important things besides the skills is maybe build trust between people with my background, which is more technical and doesn't have experience in the art field, and also from the other side, because personally I had some hard time getting in contact with people in the conservation field because I was a foreigner, right? So I didn't belong to that field. So I had to show through the work I did with Goya that really the technology I was proposing had some sense, right? And I think that's one of the major challenges. First, build this trust between the two communities, and then once you kind of break this barrier, then you can have some conversations. And then it's definitely a collaboration effort because as I said before, I don't have any background in art, so just maybe my personal interest, but I don't have a formal training in conservation or art. So I have to show, this is what I get, right, with the records. Now help me figure out what's going on here. And then I need someone that really knows the craft, knows the technique, knows the materials, knows the artist, can get into the head of the artist and say, okay, well, maybe he tried this thing because I know that he used to do this thing. So it's kind of a conversation that we need to get started. And that took me maybe 2 or 3 years just to contact different people and try to make the case that that was worth trying. So that's my personal experience.
So, I totally agree with what was just said. I mean, it really, what we're heading towards is a highly multidisciplinary, highly collaborative world where no one who shows up to the table has the answer, has the full answer. And I think that goes back to the personalities of the people involved. You need people who are open to that and not, assertive to the point where they have all the answers. I mean, you have to be flexible in terms of really understanding what's motivating these different camps. For example, when I'm working with, the team of computer scientists that I was working with on the texture piece, they would do a lot for beer, actually, but no, they would do a lot for publications. I mean, that's what was driving them. They would travel around the world if they could get a publication out of it. And for them, publication is very iterative, and I didn't really realize that. I mean, they needed a lot of publications at high sort of levels of frequency. And so I had to sort of adapt to that, and they had to adapt to this longer view and longer gestation periods that are very common in the humanities. And that takes trust, and that takes a lot of face-to-face meeting and maybe a lot of beer, too.
More beer.
More beer.
I think we're at a transitional point here in terms of skills where the generations of scholars, conservators, subject matter experts coming up have tremendous, not only computer skills, but they have good solid platforms to build on. And they're not afraid of trying something new, as opposed to prior generations of scholars, say, or someone who's an expert at ancient Greek who and we've had this case, well, this is a computer and this is how it works. So now to capitalize on those innate skills and those capabilities and push as much as possible down to the end user, scholar, conservator, whoever it may be, building on their tools. In other words, something that will work on their Mac or their PC, and allow them to do as much themselves and not have to turn immediately to a scientist or to someone with more advanced technical skills. That's not to say you don't need that. It's just you can take that first cut. It's kind of like machine translation. And you can say, oh, this is about this, or this is this, or I'm seeing this. And then you can turn to your technical expert and say, oh, can you help me out with this or that? So I think as much as possible, if we can capitalize on the developing skills of a generation to whom data and data manipulation are innate, and work with what they're familiar, and then build upon that with our own tools.
Thank you very much. Let us thank our panel for a really fascinating time travel around the globe. It's time for beer. It's also time to look at some demos out there. And I would like to close thanking the Digital Futures Committee and Adam Kelly again, who helped make this event possible. Thank you very much.